Hi everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're going to continue on with our story, A Witch in a Fix by Marian Broderick by O'Brien Press. What's happened is that Anna, who's an apprentice witch, has actually turned one of her teachers that she didn't like very much into a huge rat, and all sorts of things are happening. So we're going to find out what happens next. Chapter 3, Rat in the Classroom. The rat, Mrs. Coffey, skittered about in the chair, and I jumped up and down on the spot, laughing my head off. This was more like it. Who needed science out of books or science teachers? But about 3 seconds later, I heard footsteps coming up the hall. Then it hit me. What on earth had I done? And more importantly, what was I going to do now? The footsteps were coming closer. It had to be Mary, already on her way back from Mrs. Winkle's office. Now, even though she was my best friend, Mary didn't know I was a witch. I always kept school and witchcraft separate and never told anyone in case they treated me like a total weirdo. If I let her in, she was bound to ask where Mrs. Coffey was, and then she would see the rat and faint or something. Rats! I mean, blast, I whispered, gazing at Mrs. Coffey. She made a furious chatting sound, crossed her ratty little arms and tapped one foot. Her black eyes glittered at me. Quick as I could, I jumped back inside my magic star, pointed at her again and chanted, "Lose your snout, your tail, your fur, and change back into what you were." Nothing happened, except Mrs. Coffey squeaked and chattered even louder. I'd have to think of something else. I rushed to the door and I tried to block Mary. "Mary," I said, dropping my arm across the doorway, "so nice to see you again." Mrs. Winkle said I had to do as I was told, she said gloomily. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I suppose we'd better get on with it or we'll even be in more trouble." "Good news," I said. "Mrs. Coffey changed her mind. We're off the hook." "What?" She said. "What do you mean off the hook?" "No detention," I said. "Mrs. Coffey's busy." "Are you sure?" said Mary, looking confused. It's not like her to miss a chance to inflict a punishment. "Yep," I said. "After you left, she droned on at me for a while, but then she said she had to go home. Straight away, right now, without delay." I could hardly believe how many lies were tripping so easily out of my mouth. Mary tried to peep over my shoulder. "Is she still in there?" she whispered. "Not exactly," I said. "She had an urgent appointment at the vet, and she left in a hurry. Come on, she said we mustn't hang about." "Great," said Mary, her face breaking into a broad, dimpled grin. "I'll just get my bag." "Get it tomorrow," I said. I tried to take Mary's arm and hurry her down the corridor. "Don't be daft," said Mary, shoving me out of the way. "It's my gym stuff and just inside the door." Mary stepped through the door. I closed my eyes, put my fingers in my ears and waited. I didn't have to wait long. "Wah! Wah!" screamed Mary, rushing out of the classroom and nearly knocking me over. "Rats! Rats in there, look!" "One rat," I said, peering around the door. "Don't exaggerate." "You knew there was a rat in there," said Mary. "Sure," I said, shrugging. "It just sort of appeared while you were out. Come on, let's go." "Anna, are you nuts?" said Mary. "Those things carry diseases and everything. We need to do something," she said. "I think I'd better take another look." I sighed. "If you insist," I said. We edged back into the classroom. On the chair, Mrs. Coffey crouched and glared. She balled one foot paw into a fist and shook it at me. Mary gasped. "Is that thing threatening you?" she said. "Are rats even supposed to be able to do that?" No sooner were the words out of her mouth than Mrs. Coffey bared her pointed yellow teeth and reared up on her back legs, screeching and spitting in pure temper. Like a flash, she shot between Mary and me, scampered through the open door and disappeared down the corridor. I took a deep breath. "Friendly animal," I said. "Can we go now?" "But Anna, it's a dirty old rat," said Mary. "We need to at least tell Mrs. Winkle. Or the caretaker?" "No need for that," I said. I picked up her bag and dragged her down the corridor. "Do you want to be here all night and miss Jim?" That did the trick. Mary Maxwell loved her Jim. "I suppose you're right," she said. "Ugh, rats live in drains and rubbish tips, you know. I saw a programme about it on TV." All the way out of school, Mary yacked about rats and mice and cockroaches, but I was only half listening. I was in trouble. If Mrs. Winkle found out I was turning her staff into animals, she would probably expel me. She might even strip me of all my witchy powers. My life would be ruined. I needed to find a way of turning Cuffy the rat back into Cuffy the grouchy science teacher without Mrs. Winkle knowing, and I needed to do it fast. Chapter 4. At Home at Crag Road. That evening at home at number 13 Crag Road was very uncomfortable for me. I live with my two aunts, who aren't witches themselves but know a lot about witchcraft. They encouraged me in my magic studies. So as soon as I stepped through the kitchen door, I confessed what I'd done. I was hoping they'd help me. Fat chance. Instead of sympathising, they scolded me for hours. They were so busy lecturing me I didn't even get any tea. The only member of my family who was nice to me was my cat Charlie. "But why?" shouted Auntie Grizz for the 10th time. "What on earth made you do such a foolish, wicked thing?" "Because Mrs. Cuffy's always picks on me," I said, "and today she even made Mary cry." "Anna, dear, really," said Auntie Warmilla. "It's still going a little far, don't you think?" "She deserved it," I mumbled stubbornly. Charlie jumped up into my lap and snuggled down. At least he understood me. "No one deserves to live life as a rodent," shouted Auntie Grizz, thumping the kitchen table. She cast a pained look at the empty cage in a dusty corner in the kitchen. "And I should know." It was true, she did know. Once a long time ago, in the days when I didn't like Auntie Grizz, I turned her into a mouse. I was just beginning to learn I had magic powers, and it was thrilling, but of course Auntie Grizz didn't see that quite like that. "Do you have any idea what it's like to look at yourself in the mirror and realise you have big ears, 4 legs and a tail?" she shouted, "and not in a good way." No, I had to admit, I'd no idea how that might feel. "And for all your talent, you couldn't change Grizz back, could you, dear?" said Auntie Warmilla, shaking her head. "She lived in that cage for weeks, eating nothing but toast crumbs. In the end, we had to call in Mrs. Winkle to make her human again." My stomach did a backflip. "But we can't call in Mrs. Winkle this time," I said, panicking. "She'll skin me alive. She'll expel me. She'll turn me into something horrible." "You're already something horrible," muttered Auntie Grizz, crossing her arms. "Calm down, you two, calm down," said Auntie Warmilla. "We'll never solve anything by losing our heads." "Humph," said Auntie Grizz. "Sounds to me like she lost her head a long time ago. I blame you, Warmilla. If you always spoil the child." And off they went into an argument. They always did this. They could never agree on the best way to bring up an orphan witch, and whose fault was it that I was turning out so wayward? After about 5 minutes, I lost patience with the two of them. I took off my shoe and I banged the table with it. Charlie jumped off my lap in fright and he ran into his basket. "When you've quite finished," I said, "we still have the small problem of my science teacher skulking around St. Munchkins as a rat. What am I going to do?" There was silence in the kitchen. My aunts looked at me and each other. Auntie Grizz drummed the table with her fingers, while Auntie Warmilla hummed a little tune under her breath. Finally, Auntie Grizz sat up straight. "Where is she now?" she asked. "Don't know," I said. Then I had an idea. "That's what I have to do," I said. "Find her, coax her out of her hiding place, and turn her back into a human. Mrs. Cuffy hasn't been a rat for very long. With a bit of luck, she won't remember anything about it." "But Anna, dear," Auntie Warmilla said, "you said you tried to change her back into a human when you were in class. But it didn't work." I waved my hands about airily. "The heat of the moment," I said. "This time I'll find a really good spell. It'll be different when I get a chance to work on her properly." "And how are you supposed to find her, clever clogs?" asked Auntie Grizz. We all sat scratching our heads and chins for a few silent minutes. "I know," said Auntie Warmilla, clicking her fingers. "The crystal ball. We haven't used it for ages. That'll tell us where she is." I'd forgotten we even had a crystal ball. At Crag Road, we still had a lot of equipment from the days when my aunts believed that they were the witches and not me. We'd cauldrons and broomsticks and pointy hats and jars of strange ingredients heaped in a jumble all over the house. I don't use that sort of stuff. I don't even use a wand very often. I'm a modern witch, and all those traditions and trappings are so last century. But I must admit they can come in handy sometimes, like now. I scrambled into the kitchen counter, reached to the top of the cupboard, and lifted down a dark red box with silver stars all over it. I hopped down and placed the box on the kitchen table. We all stood around and stared at it. "Open it then," said Auntie Warmilla, nudging me. Okay, I said. I took the lid off the box and sifted through the piles of scrunched up newspaper. I felt something hard and cold and lifted it out. The crystal ball glittered as I placed it on the kitchen table. I stared at it and shivered.